Bernard Trottier is the federal MP for the Etobicoke Lakeshore riding. He is a member of the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada and serves as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Works and Government Services. Join us as our reporter Anas Siddique sits down with Mr. Trottier to discuss politics.
What prompted you to enter the political arena?
Well, I've been involved as a volunteer in political campaigns for a long time, since I was a young person actually. So I was very involved in Etobicoke Lakeshore politics from about 2002, after the merger of the Canadian Alliance with the Progressive Conservative Party. I was involved in helping put the two parties together locally. And then one of my roles was to go out and do recruiting for candidates. And so in 2009, I was recruiting candidates. And basically, I was chairing the nomination. And people, I guess, got tired of my sales pitch that I was always doing, telling people how eminently winnable this riding was for the Conservatives. And so enough people asked me, why don't I run? And so I agreed to do that. So I was acclaimed as the candidate in 2009. We were a minority at the time, so we didn't know when the election might be, which is why I was nominated so early after the last election. My interest in getting involved in local politics at the local level, working with my friends and neighbors for a common cause, and lo and behold, I was successful in my first real attempt at elected office in 2011.
How does recruiting work in terms of politics?
Well, basically, it's kind of like job recruiting in a way, but I would talk to people. Do they know somebody who might want to run here in Etobicoke Lakeshore, based on their career circumstances, family circumstances, their political leanings, of course. And then I would just call them and say, would you like to get together for a cup of coffee or a drink or whatever, and I'd like to talk to you about this opportunity of putting your name on a ballot. And sometimes they would say, sure, let's get together. Sometimes they say, no thanks. And then you say, well, do you know of other people? And they give you 3 or 4 names, and before you know it, you're working a list of 20, 30 people trying to encourage them to run. That's how recruiting really works. People sometimes think that getting involved is sort of a closed club, and it's not. And it's not an old boys club at all. I would always specifically look for female potential candidates, people from minority groups. We're trying to be as inclusive as possible when we do recruiting, and that's what I would do. I'll say especially female candidates. We're underrepresented for women in our parliament and in our party, and so I always encourage as many women as possible to put their names on the ballot.
How was your transition going from working behind the scenes to being the front-facing?
Yeah, it's very different. I guess I was always front-facing when I was in my business world. I was a business consultant and was part of the management team of a manufacturing company here in Toronto for a while. So, quite used to being front and center in front of large groups of people, doing presentations, leading some organizational changes. So, so you could say in that sense, I wasn't a backroom kind of shy and retiring person. I'm used to having a bit of limelight. The one thing that's different is it's kind of like you're on all the time, 7 days a week. The job does usually involve some work every single day. So if I'm in Ottawa Monday to Friday, there's always activity there. Then I'll come home on the weekend, and there's activity there, meeting with stakeholders, being present at events and functions in the riding. So that's the biggest transition, is that it's hard to just sort of become invisible when especially I live in this riding and I'm involved in things with my kids and with the community, and so people will come up to me on a weekend, and I'll be buying groceries at Sobeys, and people will want to bend my ear in the middle of aisle 5. And that's just part of the
You're never off then.
It's difficult to be off. Yeah.
Now, going back to when you were originally coming into politics, the media reports that when we were researching said that you weren't really expected to win the riding. To what do you attribute your success?
Because this had been a Liberal riding for quite a few years, but the reality of this riding, though, is that it was much closer than people thought. And I knew that because I was very close to the numbers and knew which neighborhoods and what was the path to victory. And so I was actually very confident when I was nominated in 2009. I built a team and had a plan and was executing against that plan. And so it wasn't a huge surprise to me when we won in 2011, especially a couple weeks before the election. You could sense both in the gut feel, just talking to people, but also with survey data that we had. And so it's really satisfying when you really work hard towards an objective and you actually meet it. For me, it was something that it was a very conscious decision with a plan to get there, and then that's where the satisfaction for me was.
What was your first impression and question period when you first started actually being an MP?
Yeah, well, question period is the one thing that people see, and it's really just a small tip of the iceberg of the activity. Question period itself is a bit of theater. There's questions that have a certain level of, call it, manufactured outrage, and there's answers that have call it a certain manufactured sense of bravado about them. It's useful to have in our democracy because it does signal what are the important issues of the day. So the media, in many cases, lead what are the things that get asked about in question period, and then they follow the questions and answers in question period. But the real activity is all that stuff there's stuff that you do see, such as committee meetings. There are things that you do see, such as the debates in the House of Commons, and then there's a whole lot of things that you don't see. So these are things like caucus meetings, where a lot of the vigorous debates occur, and this would be, government and opposition, where we have these fierce differences of opinion. We hammer out policies in those caucus meetings, and then we come out of that with call it a unified front, because that's what we've decided to do as a team.
Right.
And politics, party politics, is definitely a team activity. You have to do things as a team to be successful. And generally, in our system, it's via parties that you have to build consensus within the parties, and that's where you can have those differences of opinion, which then emerge as a certain form of consensus within the party.
Is it harder for independent candidates?
It's extremely hard for independents to get elected. Like I mentioned, in 2011, there were no independents who were elected. Everybody was under some party banner. Since then, some people have left their caucuses for various reasons, and now sit as independents. They have the same rights and privileges as every other MP. Actually, they don't participate in committees. That's one thing that is different about being independent. But they certainly can be heard in debates in the House of Commons. They have constituency offices and staff and budgets, just like everybody else.
Now, being the elected representative for thousands of people in this riding, do you think that the media accurately portrays the needs and issues affecting your riding?
Yeah, well, that's not necessarily their job. Their job is to, and it's okay. I mean, it's okay for the media to have opinions. It's not, and so typically media are trying to or advance a certain point of view, and as long as you know that those are different points of view that exist, it's part of a healthy democracy to have different points of view within, not just within our political system, but within our media. So, I know that certain media outlets will approach a problem from a certain angle, or approach a story from a certain angle. I just have to recognize that. So, the thing about today's society is that the media don't control everything. Even as recently as 20 or 30 years ago, they certainly had more control, but now because of our own ability to publish things on our own websites and via social media and all that, there are some built-in checks and balances. If the media say a certain thing, I can publish without having to go through a media channel my own point of view on something.
Yeah. Do you think, Toronto being one of the most populated cities in Canada, do you think the most, of course, do you think the issues relating to Toronto as an urban area, the GTA, for example, do you think their voices are heard federally?
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, so in our system, it's essentially one person, one vote. I mean, there are some little balances where a small province like Prince Edward Island has more than its weight in Parliament. But because we've got so many people in the GTA, that's reflected in the build-up of our House of Commons. And so there's a lot of people, and it's actually very competitive. You've got three parties represented in the House of Commons who represent different ridings from Toronto. So there's a lot of focus on Toronto issues. It's impossible to ignore Toronto or GTA issues. And so the number one thing that I hear about from Torontonians all the time, Etobians all the time, is transit issues. Right? So as a federal government, we're not the lead on it, but we're certainly there to support the city and the region and the province when they want to figure out what they want to do with transit. We're there typically with checkbooks.
I'd like to move more towards some personal questions now.
Sure.
You are an MP, so like you were saying earlier, you're a very busy person. You're working essentially 7 days a week. How do you like to spend time with your family?
Busy. I'll say one thing. There are a lot of busy people in society. Whether I was doing this job or something else, I'd probably be busy anyway. And friends of mine, acquaintances of mine, I know they're all busy too. People have jobs, people have families, people have their passions and pastimes and those kinds of things. So people organize their lives. It's just time management, scheduling. That's just a fact of life in the modern world. So I do the same thing. My wife is she's got a career. We have a couple of kids who have their own pursuits, and so we just need to be organized. And you have to set aside time in this job with family. I like to say that health and my family, those are higher order priorities than this job. If I don't have those things, I wouldn't actually be effective in what I'm doing. So I always make sure to set aside time for take care of myself in terms of my own personal health, and make sure to spend as much time as I can with my family. In the summer, we're not in session, but the work of an MP continues. But again, I'm always trying to schedule as much time as possible with my family.
Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.